Okay, well, I'll get started with my introductory remarks. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for coming this evening. My name is Jessica Robinson. I am an adult services librarian with Heights Libraries. Before we get started, I had two other things that I wanted just to touch on. The first is to encourage everyone to attend our spring local history programs. I put them into the chat box to the side. So you can see we have the history of Stadium Square coming up. We have house history coming up, and also the history of Cleveland Heights coming up. And the Zoom information for each of those programs is in the chat box. You can also see our full listing of programs by visiting heightslibrary.org and looking at our events page. My contact information, in case anyone has any questions, is also in the chat box. My email is localhistory@heightslibrary.org. So if you have any questions about the programs or anything like that, oh, not seeing it in the chat. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, let me copy this and then I will put it down there. Thank you all for letting me know. Okay, let me put this down here. Okay. All right. So the second thing is just a bit of housekeeping. So tonight we are recording this so that it can go on the YouTube, the Cleveland Heights Historical YouTube channel. So we're just asking that you keep your microphones and your video muted during the presentation. There will be time at the end for a question and answer session. So if you'd like to, there's two options for question and answers. The first is to put your questions in the chat box as they occur to you, and then I can ask the presenters at the end of the program. Or you can also, at the end, you'll be able to raise your hand, and at that point you could, directly unmute and ask a question, but just wait for those towards the end. Okay, so those were the two most important things. And now I am going to introduce Margaret Land, who is the coordinator of our presentation tonight. Margaret has been with the Cleveland Restoration Society since 2013. In her current role as Director of Preservation Services and Publications, Margaret provides a range of services to document and preserve historic structures, including building assessments, surveys, and historic designation. Margaret manages special projects designated to use historic preservation as a placemaking tool. Through these community engagement efforts, she is able to diversify the listing of the Cleveland area landmarks and historic districts and build a stronger historic preservation constituency in previously underrepresented neighborhoods. Margaret is the current editor of the Society's magazine, Facade. She is a member of the Cleveland Heights Landmark Commission and an adjunct professor at Ursuline College, where she earned her Master of Art in Historic Preservation. She is also a presenter of many of our wonderful programs. So please join me in a virtual round of applause to welcome Margaret.
Thanks, Jessica. It was quite the introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who's joining us here today and to our panelists. As Jessica mentioned, in addition to my role at the Restoration Society, I'm also a member of the Cleveland Heights Landmark Commission. And this presentation is part of the spring series that the Landmark Commission helps to put together to celebrate preservation. In 2019, the city of Cleveland Heights became a certified local government. And in order to become a certified local government, our city had to enact some new legislation to help further protect our local landmarks. And this also means that now our local landmarks can access economic incentives, specifically historic tax credits. In this presentation, you will hear about state and federal historic tax credits and how they're an excellent incentive for the rehabilitation of our commercial structures. You will also learn a bit about the benefits of taking a preservation approach to the repair and maintenance of your older home. And as we know, Cleveland Heights is full of wonderful older homes. The City of Cleveland Heights has been a longtime partner with the Cleveland Restoration Society's Heritage Home Program. And through that program, homeowners are able to access technical assistance and low interest loans to improve their homes with a preservation approach. This program is the subject of a housing study that demonstrates the benefits of preservation at the residential level. So without further ado, why don't we get started? I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Diana Wellman. Diana is a principal at Naylor Wellman, LLC, a women-owned business located in Northeast Ohio. The firm was established in 2013 and specializes in historic building preservation and adaptive use, architectural history, and historic preservation planning. Naylor Wellman has listed 60 National Register historic districts and individual buildings encompassing over 3,000 historic resources. Since 2009, their portfolio of rehabilitation projects has secured federal tax credits valued at $134 million and 34 Ohio Preservation Tax Credit Awards at $74 million. During their careers, they have completed over 50 successful historic tax credit projects. Diana is a registered preservation consultant qualified under the Federal Historic Preservation Professional Requirements as described by the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Archaeology and Historic Preservation. Diana has over 25 years of experience in historic preservation.
Thank you, Margaret. So I am going to share my screen with all of you and tell you a little bit about federal historic tax credits. So federal historic tax credits are a program that comes out of the National Park Service. It's a program that's shared with the Internal Revenue Service. It's an incentive by the federal government to encourage people to readapt historic buildings. So as you can see here, since 2016 through 2020, over 1,000 historic tax credit projects occurred in the United States. And that was $4 billion in private investment. So it's a cottage industry, so to say, but it really is an industry that encourages development, particularly for those historic buildings. And as you also see here, Ohio has had 420 of those 1,000 certified rehabilitation projects with $2.4 billion in investment. So Ohio is one of the leaders in the United States in using this program. Oh, let me see. There we go. So why would the federal government encourage incentives for historic buildings? And the reason why is because historic tax credit projects shape places that matter. They are the root of our history, our culture, and the ability to maintain these buildings, put them back into use, help create vibrant neighborhoods. They reinvigorate commercial districts, and they create unique opportunities for both market rate and affordable housing. So historic tax credits, for the most part, are for commercial use or income generating properties. Individual homes are not eligible for tax credit unless there is a business use inside that home. So the historic preservation federal tax credit process is basically a three-step process. It's about whether or not the building is eligible to take advantage of those historic tax credits. It's about rehabilitating a building, and then ultimately taking that rehabilitation and turning it into dollars through the federal historic tax credits. There are three other things that require you to be able to take advantage of historic tax credits, and that is that you are, one, a certified historic structure. For the case of the federal government, a certified historic structure is a building that is either listed on the National Register individually, or it is a contributing building in a National Register historic district. Cleveland Heights has, I think, the most historic districts for any community in the state of Ohio. The second thing that you need to do is you need to be basically fixing up that old building. So the rehabilitation must be substantial. On a project, let's just say, just for easy money's sake, if the building is valued at $500, you need to spend more than $500 to take advantage of the tax credit. The rehabilitation program is run through in the state of Ohio. It's run through the state of Ohio's Preservation Office with Ohio History Connection. They have reviewers there that help make sure the project meets the standards. And then once they believe that they have met that standard criterion, they serve as an advisory role. They then forward it on to the National Park Service, who approves the project and then lets the IRS know that the project is approved. When I talk about the standards, I'm talking about the rehabilitation, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And those standards are basically a set of 10 standards that ask the applicant, the person or persons that are rehabilitating a historic building, to maintain the historic character of the building. They expect changes, they expect you to adapt it. And we're going to see 3 examples here that I'm going to share with you. And the pictures that you're seeing below here is the Foundry. It's a building located along the Cuyahoga River, downtown Cleveland. And it was an old foundry building. And it now serves as a high performance training center for both sailing and rowing. And you can see inside this building right here, they put in interior tanks. And this can be used 24/7, around the clock, all year long. The rowers sit right here. And they sit right here and they can row right into this water. There's actually 2 tanks there. And these are just some pictures of the project once it was finished. So I'm going to share with you 3 projects. All 3 of these projects use both federal and state tax credits. Stephanie is going to talk more about the state tax credits, but I just wanted to give you some examples of how this program is practically used. So this is the Mueller Electric Company building. It's located in Asiantown at East 31st Street. And it was a former home of the Mueller Electric Company building. They were the inventors and manufacturers of alligator clips. That little clip that the dentist puts around your neck, that's what they made there. From 1922 to 1976, they added to their building. There are a total of 13 additions over the course of the construction. And here are just some of the players involved. Midwest Development Partners and Sustainable Communities Associates were the developers for the project. Biological Architects were the architects, and John G. Johnson were the construction firm. The building is 7,000 square feet. It was vacant in 2007 and rehabilitated in 2017. It turned that 70,000 square feet of vacant property into 55 market rate housing units at $11 million. And you can see there, the 2.2 from the federal and the 1.7 comes to about $4 million in historic and state and federal tax credits. And that was a very important part of their capital stack. Over 100 construction jobs were created during the course of the rehabilitation, and there were 4 permanent jobs created afterwards. So I'm just going to take you through some slides of the project. So the top is what the building looked like before rehabilitation, and then the bottom is after. And as you can see, the building's historic character has been more than well maintained. Here is a couple other elevations and images. So this top here, this is the side lot. We added an entry. There's a stairwell right in here that provides a second means of egress out of the building. We also extended the roof of the elevator and stairs so that there's roof access to a roof deck. Here's some interior shots of what the building looked like before and after. And you can see again that the building maintained its historic character. Knoll posts, the door, that this part here was added to freshen this up a little bit, but for the most part, it looks pretty much like it looked, just nice, fresh and clean. This project also had a few challenges, which is common with historic buildings, and that's why they have to adapt. So here we had a very big footprint. The building was wide. So one of the aspects that Biological Architects brought into the project was to introduce a courtyard, and that's the courtyard now finished. This central area allowed for amenity spaces, fitness room, bike room, dog washing station, a community room. But this aspect right here really helped, take those wasted space or non-rentable spaces and turn them into an amenity for the project. This is what the interior of the building looked like prior to rehabilitation. And then here's that finished, look of the building. So here's an apartment building. There's that bike room. This is kind of that box that you were seeing, and these are the corridors that lead to the apartments. Here's an apartment building, apartment unit, and then below is the community room. The next project I'm going to share with you is a low-income housing project, mixed use. First floor is used for commercial use, and then the upper floor is brought in 38 affordable housing units. This is the old Forest City Bank in Seymour block. It actually consists of two projects or two buildings. The former bank building, you may remember that Massimo's restaurant was in the first floor. In 1983, the building experienced a fire. It was shortly thereafter, it was listed on the National Register out of fear that the building would be lost. And here are some historic images of that bank lobby and the building shortly after it was built. This is about a 1909 photograph. Snavely Development and Construction were the developers and the construction team, and Dimmitt Architects were the architects. Again, you can see there's $13.7 million rehabilitation costs into this project, and they had 4.7 between the Ohio and state tax credit and the federal tax credit. Again, it had 100 construction jobs, and then there were 85 permanent jobs simply because of that first floor commercial component. So here are befores and after. And again, you really can see that the building after still looks like it has looked. It's just nice, fresh, and clean. Even the Kiefer sign remains from when this first floor was occupied by the Kiefer German restaurant. Here's some other changes that you can see. So this little addition was added sometime in the 1990s, and you can see all the bay windows had been covered over. The bay windows were brought back, and this element was altered to become the residential entry. And here's just some before and after where we were able to replicate these doors and these windows so that they meet all our energy efficiency components, but still reflect that historic character. This building had additional unique things that occurred to it. We added low profile solar panels to the roof that you cannot see from the street. And there's a canopy here, and this helps provide energy for the building. Another unique thing that occurred during the construction was that an American kestrel falcon had been living up in the eave of the Seymour block. It was discovered during construction. She had a little brood going on in there, so construction stopped. The construction workers put a camera, and that camera can still be seen on YouTube if you have any interest in seeing it. And they let her brood grow until they left. And then after they left, they fixed the cornice here, and then working with Ohio Natural Resources, they came up with a nest. They built a nest, and you can see it tucked up in there. And she has come back the past few years and continued to grow little baby birds in there. Here's some first floor before and afters. So as I mentioned, Massimo Restaurant had been in this building for a long time in the Forest City Bank building on the first floor. The first floor is now an incubator for restaurants. They can house up to 4 different restaurants, and then they share a bar and eating space. It did close during COVID, but it will be opening back up here shortly. The Seymour block, it had workspace, first floor workspace, shared workspace. So here's the space before, and this is what it looks like after. And that's where those 85 jobs are coming from, that smaller businesses were able to have these work shared spaces. And there's a first floor cafe bar in there as well. And then this is the upper floor. So this is what the space looked like before when it was offices on the upper floors. These are the low-income housing apartments or affordable housing. And then this is actually where the two buildings meet. They were joined sometime in the 1980s. And so this is the Forest City Bank building. And then this is the Seymour block. So there's that connection. The last project I'm going to share with you is the Ellen Gross building in Kent. It's straight up commercial. It was a 1928 garment manufacturing building. And here's right after it was opening, all the ladies standing in front of the building. It was designed by Kent architect Charles Kistler. Renaissance 2000 were the developer. DS Architecture was the architects, and Gilbane Building Construction was the contractor on the project. It's 30,000 square foot, 2-part commercial building with a tower. And I'll talk about the tower here in a second. there was $10.6 million in rehabilitation on this building. This 1928 building kind of reflects what we know as 1930 concrete, and it's often pretty, they used a lot of aggregate, so it failed quite a bit. And you'll be able to see in the following pictures that we were able to replicate and fix. Almost this entire parapet had to be replaced. So this is DSA architects having a little fun after the project was complete, imitating that picture taken back in 1928. So here are the befores. The building was pretty well sound, and you'll see in the interior, it was really just a beautiful timber frame building. But it was really just the masonry that was really struggling to survive after nearly 100 years. So here are after pictures. There was a skyline on top of the building that had all been covered over, and there you can see it's been brought back. And this tower is now a single residential unit, very mixed use. Here's just some before and afters of the back. This was the egress stair that was added at the rear. And this building is really lovely. It's right located along the Kaga Valley, and there's a bike path right here. Stone was there. This is natural bedrock. And then this retaining wall was built to make sure that the wall was intact. And then here's those before and afters of the interior. So you can see very much retained. And then DS Architect occupies half the building, and the remaining 2/3 of the building is occupied by a water manufacturing distributor. So there's DSA's architects' offices, and then there's that apartment building. So as you can see, federal tax credits allow you to adapt buildings, allow reinvestment, and allow those changes that need to occur so the buildings can be successful once they have been rehabilitated. So that's what I have for you.
Thanks, Deanna. It's always so fun to see inside of those projects, and so inspiring too, to see the new uses. Up next, we will hear from Dr. Stephanie Ryberg-Webster. Stephanie is an associate professor of urban studies in the Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. Her research explores the complex intersections of historic preservation and urban development, including preservation and demolition in legacy cities, synergies and tensions between preservation and community development, federal and state historic rehabilitation tax credits, and social inclusion in preservation, including the preservation of Cleveland's African American heritage. Dr. Ryberg-Webster's current work explores the history of historic preservation in Cleveland during the 1970s and early 1980s as urban disinvestment escalated. Dr. Ryberg-Webster teaches courses in urban planning, historic preservation, urban design, the city and film, and contemporary urban issues. Welcome, Dr. Webster. We need you to unmute, please.
Okay, now there we go. I always forget one thing. So thank you for having me this evening. I am going to focus my remarks on the state of Ohio's historic preservation tax credit, which Diana briefly referenced in her talk. So in 2015, I worked with a team of researchers from Cleveland State's Levin College, including our Center for Economic Development, to evaluate the economic impacts of the state's preservation tax credit. My remarks this evening will focus primarily on the findings from that study. And if you want, you can access the study in full at the link shown at the bottom of this slide. And I think at some point, Margaret may also place that link in the chat. So before I dive into our findings, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the state's historic preservation tax credit. It is administered as a partnership between the Ohio Development Services Agency and our State Historic Preservation Office. The state credit covers up to 25% of qualified rehabilitation expenditures, and it is capped at $5 million per project. The credit typically covers, in total, about 15% of project costs because projects have non-rehabilitation expenditures and/or because of that $5 million cap. The tax credit is highly competitive. There is a $60 million limit on total historic tax credits awarded per year, and awards are made twice each year in June and December. The state credit can be, and often is, paired with the federal historic tax credit, which Diana described. Although this is not required, and it's important to note that the state credit can in fact be used on its own. In recent years, Ohio Development Services has also developed a pipeline initiative for the state credit, providing pre-development grants for things like nominating individual buildings or districts to the National Register of Historic Places, or for conducting integrity investigations on historic structures. Since the first round of awards in 2007, the state has approved more than 500 applications for historic tax credit projects, supporting the rehabilitation of more than 700 buildings in 72 different communities. The most recent round of awards occurred this past December and included $26.5 million in tax credits to 51 historic buildings in 11 communities. The 26th round, the next one of awards, will be announced this June. According to Ohio Development Services, the state credit is projected to leverage more than $7 billion in external funding, in other words, private investment or federal tax credits. ODS further promotes that the state tax credit attracts about $6.20 in private and or federal investments for every dollar that the state spends on the historic tax credit. As I said, in 2015, our team set out to evaluate the economic impact and overall effectiveness of the state's tax credit program. Using a mix of descriptive statistics, financial cost benefit analysis, economic impact analyses, and qualitative case studies, we conservatively estimated the direct and indirect economic impacts of the program. It's important to note that at the time of our study, there were 238 completed projects, which really focused kind of the bulk of what we were looking at. Overall, we found that the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit helps to preserve Ohio's historic properties and reinvigorate economic activity in buildings, most of which were previously deteriorated and or vacant. It catalyzed economic and demographic growth for many of Ohio's communities. It has a positive impact on employment, business establishments, wages, property values, property taxes, and population, which is good news for many of Ohio's communities. So in terms of jobs, wages, and businesses, the state tax credit generated employment and increased the number of business establishments. The state tax credit supported both temporary construction jobs and long-term permanent operational jobs. Total employment at businesses registered at tax credit buildings increased by more than 3,600 jobs, and there was a 50% net increase in the number of businesses located in tax credit buildings. These businesses added a total of $201.4 million in additional wages to the state of Ohio. Now, keep in mind that because of the structure of our study, we looked only at businesses who were registered at the address of tax credit buildings. Our findings are thus very conservative because they do not include people who may work in tax credit buildings for businesses registered elsewhere. Jobs associated with tax credit projects tend to fall into a range of categories, the most prominent of which are the real estate industry for the process of development, hospitality, restaurant services, maintenance and repair, construction, other building services, landscape services, and others. Overall, our study found that the state historic tax credit had a positive impact on property values, and this finding really reinforces a wide body of additional scholarly research that has associated an increase in property values with historic preservation. We used county auditor and treasurer records for a subset of projects and found that the taxable value of tax credit buildings increased by about $208 million. And again, this is just a subset of completed projects. Properties immediately adjacent to tax credit projects also increased in value, as did radial properties, which are not directly adjacent, but within 150 feet of tax credit projects. Of course, increased valuations result in increased property tax revenue for local municipalities. And that tax revenue increase is substantial for historic tax credit projects. And a large reason for this is because many of the buildings were vacant or highly underutilized prior to the tax credit supported reinvestment. We also attempted to capture the impact that the state tax credit has on demographic change, primarily population. Because projects are really scattered across the state, it's hard to capture their contribution to population change. So for this part of our study, we focused on 2 census tracts in downtown Cleveland where there was a cluster of 7 residential state tax credit projects. These tracts provided us with the most reliable statistics on population change in proximity to tax credit buildings. These 7 residential projects directly added 531 housing units to downtown Cleveland. From 2000 to 2013, these same 2 tracts, census tracts, had a population increase of 3,288 residents. We concluded that these residential tax credit projects, combined with additional non-residential projects and new construction, boosted market confidence in downtown Cleveland, spurring increased demand for downtown housing and ultimately supporting population growth. And in a city that continues to experience overall population loss, these pockets of growth are, of course, a welcome change. Our study also included a number of qualitative case studies, and I'm going to highlight just 4 of them this evening to give you a sense of the range of projects and type of outcomes that can occur with the support of the State of Ohio's Historic Preservation Tax Credit. So this one here is the Cleveland Trust Complex, which included the Ameritrust Tower and Rotunda and the Sweatland Building at 1010 Euclid Avenue. This $231 million project received $31 million in state preservation tax credits. The catalytic injection of state tax credits is really credited with saving the Marcel Brewer design tower from demolition. Now, I will note that clearly this project exceeded that $5 million cap per project that I referenced at the beginning of my talk. In the first round of funding, that project cap did not exist, and based on strong appeals from the developer, local stakeholders, and preservationists, the state awarded the project an exceptionally high level of tax credits. So I wouldn't expect this on current projects, but that decision at that time really hinged on the project's scale and its potential to catalyze significant economic development in the area. The completed project includes hotel space, apartments, restaurants, the downtown Heinen's grocery store, offices, and other retail space. The old Ohio School for the Deaf building is located in Columbus and was vacant for more than 30 years before the Ohio Historic Tax Credit helped restore it into a modern-day school. The Ohio School for the Deaf occupied this building from its opening in 1829 until 1953, and then scattered uses used the building until the 1980s when it was vacated and began suffering from disrepair. In 2013, the state awarded around $3.9 million in tax credits to help convert it into the Cristo Rey Columbus High School, a private Catholic college preparatory high school for underprivileged youth. The financing for this project, and many of these projects have quite complex financing packages. This one also included federal historic preservation tax credits, a loan from the Catholic Diocese of Columbus, and federal new markets tax credits, which support development in low-income area. And this building now serves as an anchor in the revitalization of the east side of downtown Columbus. The final 2 case studies are smaller projects which illustrate the versatility of the state's historic tax credit. Horizon House is in Portsmouth, which is situated along the Ohio River about 100 miles east of Cincinnati. The building, built in 1906, is 5 stories in downtown Portsmouth. In 1981, the building was actually adaptively reused into affordable housing, but suffered from a lack of maintenance and continued disinvestment, which caused deteriorating conditions. Around 2010, the Ohio Capital Corporation for Housing acquired the property because it was owned by an absentee landlord and falling into slum conditions. The financing included federal and state historic tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, and a loan from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. The $8.1 million renovation restored the building into 50 units of high-quality, affordable senior housing. And finally, really just to emphasize the versatility of the state tax credit to a wide range of buildings. The final example that I'll use tonight is the John T. Wilson Homestead, which is in Scott Township, Adams County. It is a very rural site. This small project cost just over $576,000 with an Ohio Historic Tax Credit of almost $62,000. The house was built in 1844 for John T. Wilson, an Ohio businessman, abolitionist, Civil War Union captain, Ohio State Senator, and U.S. Representative. The property is also believed to have served as a stop on the Underground Railroad. In 2006, a local resident purchased it and subsequently applied for a state historic tax credit in the program's first round. This was only one of 4 small projects to do so. The home was converted into a bed and breakfast, which supports tourism-based economic development in this part of Southern Ohio. The property is about 10 miles from Serpent Mound, which is on track to be designated as a World Heritage Site in the near future. In addition to the bed and breakfast, the owners offer tours of the site. The property also has meeting and educational space and serves as the site of an annual county heritage fair. In conclusion, the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit is a key driver of local economic development and community development, while of course also supporting the preservation of our state's rich array of invaluable historic resources. I've provided on this last slide links to key websites, including the Ohio Development Services Agency and Ohio History Connection, and their information on the state's tax credit, as well, again, as the link to our economic impact study, which has a lot more detail than I presented here today. So that is what I have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really enjoy seeing the wide range of projects that can take advantage of the state credit. And I also just think it's a great reminder to understand that the economic benefits go beyond just the building being restored, but comes in the form of jobs and, you know, ongoing employment in those rehabilitated structures. That's really great. So last but not least, Dr. Brian Mikelbank is here to talk to us about the economics benefits of preservation at the residential level. Dr. Mikelbank is an associate professor of urban studies at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. He is an urban geographer with varied interests in quantitative spatial analysis. His recent research focuses on the spatial analysis of metropolitan housing markets and dynamics of urban-suburban change. Brian teaches classes in housing analysis, quantitative and spatial data analysis, urban geography, urban development, and urban geographic information systems. Welcome, Brian.
Great, thank you very much. So tonight I'm going to be talking about residential historic preservation, and here's my plan. First, I'm going to talk about some of the housing research very generally, and to start with, 2 main areas of housing research in terms of price and stability. The second thing is to talk about how preservation investment fits within that range of housing research and price and stability. And then finally, to talk specifically about how this is played out in the Cuyahoga County housing market based on 2 completed research studies. So to start, these are 2 very active areas of housing research. The first deals with the price of housing, explaining the price, predicting the price of housing, trying to understand what causes changes in the price of housing. And in those studies, influences are generally categorized into these 3 areas. The first are things that have to do with the structure itself, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the size of the house, the quality of it, its age, things like that relate directly to the structure. The second category are influences that have to do with the neighborhood. So these might be things like housing density, walkability, access to quality neighborhood services like a quality school district. Those would be neighborhood level influences on housing price. And then finally, the third category is accessibility. for a particular housing location, what level of access does that provide you to things that you value? So often measured are maybe distance to the highway, transit accessibility, or distance or accessibility to job centers or recreation centers. The second area of housing research deals with neighborhood stability. And these are common topics within that neighborhood stability topic: the stability of price over time, the stability of the neighborhood in terms of turnover, how often are people moving in and out, how stable is the neighborhood in terms of housing tenure, that is owner occupiers versus renters, and the prevalence of vacancy, eviction, and foreclosure. And these two topics are of course related. You wouldn't picture people shelling out top dollar for a neighborhood that's very unstable in terms of any of these characteristics. And often, in fact, people will take this whole neighborhood topic and kind of cram it into this price of housing neighborhood topic. But especially in our area, there's enough research on neighborhood stability for it to stand on its own as a research topic. So where does residential historic preservation fit into these broad areas of housing research? On the price front, historic preservation is an investment directly in the structures. So you're physically altering the quality or quantity of the structure itself, and that is often reflected in the price. These investments improve the neighborhood housing stock, and we know that houses in neighborhoods with quality housing stock sell for more than houses in neighborhoods with a deteriorating housing stock. It also serves as a strong signal to shoppers that either owners or renters, that the neighborhood is worth investing in, that this is a market that people are investing in, that it's economically worth it. And lastly, there's a large literature on the price effects of historic designation, either at the structure level or the district level, where you would have a location within a historic district. On the neighborhood stability front, households that are undertaking these investments are literally more invested in the neighborhood. And that investment makes you stick around longer. It makes you less likely to leave the neighborhood. And it also serves as a strong signal to your neighbors that this is a neighborhood worth investing in, and where one investment encourages neighbors to also invest, and that in turn makes those neighbors also more likely to stay in the neighborhood, further contributing to neighborhood stability. The specific results I'm going to talk about tonight are from two research projects that I completed, one in 2007, and the second one was in 2015, but you'll see it's listed in 18 because it took a while to get that one into print. But the research that I talk about tonight came from a combination of these two studies, and both of them were focused on this one program, the Heritage Home Program of the Cleveland Restoration Society. There's three components to this program: the workshops, the technical advice, and the loans. My research focused mostly on the loans. So these are low interest home equity loans based on the after rehab value. The loans could be for rehab, for renovation, or for preservation on properties that are residential, 1 to 3 family, at least 50 years old, and in a participating community. A little general program data. This is first the total loan amount program-wide over time. So you can see the data that I worked with was from 1993 to 2013. And the total amount, you could see this increase here that occurred around the time that the loans were expanded to the suburbs, not just within the city of Cleveland. And a lot of the housing graphs that we make that include the housing crisis have this kind of shape, where there's this general increase over time until the housing crisis hits, then things decline for a while, and then they start to recover. And so we do see that shape here, where the total loan value countywide peaked at about $5 million, then declined through the housing crisis, and then recovered to almost $4 million annually, going into residential structures in county neighborhoods. The average loan amount steadily increased over time, and at the end of this study was a little bit over $50,000 per loan. Overall, the chart covers 1,045 Home Heritage Program loans and a total of $36 million. This throughout the county is where the loans were located over the study period, 1993 to 2013. Again, this is slightly over 1,000 loans. There were almost 200 loans in Cleveland Heights over the study period. Broader than the study period for the total Heritage Home Program loan history, there have been 271 Heritage loans in Cleveland Heights, totaling $10.8 million. So within the county, what has been the relationship between preservation and price in the research that was completed? Well, first I looked for the structure effect. What was the price impact for properties that actually had a Heritage Home Program loan? That was the first question. And second, we were interested in knowing if that price effect spilled over to the neighbors, whereby a house that was near a Home Heritage Program loan property sold, but it didn't have a loan itself. It was just near one that did. So here's what those results look like. First, we're looking at appreciation rates from 2001 through 2013. These are the data for properties that sold that were not near a Restoration Society loan. So for a particular year, we would see for 2002, for example, that the appreciation rate of houses that sold in 2002 that were not near a Restoration Society loan appreciated annually at a little more than 4% since its last sale. When we add to these properties that were near a Restoration Society loan, we could see what their appreciation rates look like. And in general, the appreciation rates of these gray bars are greater than the ones that were not near Restoration Society loans. So in 2002, the appreciation rate was a little over 6%. We could see this housing crisis effect again, where appreciation rates were actually negative in 2008 and then had started to recover throughout the rest of the time period. But even in those cases, the sales that were near a Restoration Society loan, their depreciation was lower than the comparison set. So even though it's odd to think about a positive impact that these properties depreciated less, that in fact is what occurred, that depreciation was greater in properties that weren't near Restoration Society loans. The last category is what happened to the properties themselves that actually had the loans. When we add those to the mix here in this red bar, at first glance, it looks pretty positive that the red bars appreciated higher than the properties that were around the loans and higher than the properties that weren't around the loans. But when we looked a little deeper, we could see that these are the numbers of sales that actually occurred for the basis of each one of these bars. And those number of sales are really too few to base strong statistical statements on. So it turns out that the properties that are getting these loans are much less likely to sell than their neighboring properties or than average properties. So while we went into this analysis and this graph looking for a price effect, really what we found was a neighborhood stabilization effect, because once properties get these loans, they're much less likely to sell. We didn't want to give up on impacts on the loan properties though. So what we did was we turned to value instead of price. The loan properties weren't selling very often, so price wasn't that useful to us. So we turned to the Cuyahoga County's estimated market value. This is the estimated market value that's used to determine your property taxes every year. And the benefit here is that every property gets an estimated market value every year. They don't have to sell to get one of these. Everyone has one every year. So we were able to look at changes in value over time, and this is what those look like. This first set of bars is just for the city of Cleveland. And remember, this is 2006 to 2012. So these are our turbulent housing times when housing is not appreciating, it's depreciating. But we see the similar pattern that we saw with sales prices. Depreciation in CRS loan properties is the smallest. It's the next smallest in properties near the Restoration Society loans. And depreciation is the most severe in properties that are not near Restoration Society loans. And this is the percent appreciation on the left-hand side here. So this was the pattern that we found in the city, and it was very similar to the pattern that we revealed in the suburbs and in the county overall. So we have this same pattern of the most favorable property level results are occurring for properties that had these CRS loans. And the next best category is that spillover and neighborhood effect of those loans. In the second major category of neighborhood stability, we wanted to investigate this also. There are lots of indicators of neighborhood stability, but given that we had the foreclosure crisis here that burgeoned into the full-blown housing crisis, we wanted to look at foreclosure rate. This is also important because this was at a time when there was really a lot of discussion on the relative merits of demolition of housing units, on rehabbing them or preserving them. So we were very curious to see if properties that had these preservation loans fared any better through the housing crisis in terms of foreclosure. So here's what we found. We looked at the foreclosure rate from 06 to 13, and this is the foreclosure rate on the Heritage Home Program properties. Very low, generally less than 1%. When we compare that to the foreclosure rate countywide, that generally hovered around 4 to 6%. So the foreclosure rate on the heritage loan properties was much, much lower throughout the foreclosure crisis than the foreclosure rate in general. This brought up our next question, where we wondered if these heritage loans had a lower foreclosure rate because the location of the loans was just in very strong neighborhoods. So maybe this has less to do with the loan product, but more to do with these loans are all only being made in neighborhoods that have a foreclosure rate of about 1%, and that's what we're picking up here. So to answer that question, we identified clusters of preservation activity throughout the county, and there were 3 of them. I'll focus on this one that includes Cleveland Heights here that's shown in blue. So what we wanted to do was see what the overall foreclosure rate was within each cluster, and then compare that to the heritage foreclosure rate just within that same cluster. So in that sense, we'd be more comparing apples to apples. And here's what we found. Just focusing on the Cleveland Heights cluster, the foreclosure rate in this cluster over this time period was about 1/3 of 1%, where the overall foreclosure rate was 4%, more than 10 times greater. And an overall foreclosure rate about 10 times greater than the heritage foreclosure rate was common across these other two areas of preservation concentration also. So you could see their overall foreclosure rates in about the 5% range, and their heritage foreclosure rates in about the 1/2 of 1% range. So it was in fact the case that the heritage foreclosure rate was much, much lower countywide and within these cluster areas. So it was not the case that these loans were just being made to strong areas that had lower foreclosures overall. So in summary, these research products came from these 2 research projects that I had worked on, and we've identified a positive price effect, although it was anecdotal for the loan properties, but definitely positive value impacts of preservation properties. And those price and value impacts spilled over to neighboring properties as well. And when we turned to neighborhood stability, we found positive impacts of loan properties, both in terms of the reduced turnover, that was the surprise finding, and in a much lower consistent foreclosure rate. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone has questions, please send them into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, you could ask a question to our presenters.
I'll start by asking our panelists, maybe Deanna or Stephanie, do you see good use of state and or federal tax credits, good potential in Cleveland Heights with our commercial stock?
Sure. So, obviously between Lee Road, Cedar Fairmount, Coventry, there's obviously buildings there that could be listed on the National Register that maybe perhaps are not. Rockefeller Building is one of those buildings that is listed on the National Register that could take advantage of it, although Jim takes very good care of that building. The Medusa Building as well. is a building that has been kicking around for a while. It has gone towards that process of getting listed on the National Register. And our certified local government projects, our certified local government landmarks, that's what I meant to say, those buildings are right now eligible for state tax credits, which both Medusa and Rockefeller Building are. And I can't think of the one that's at Cedar Fairmount, what that actual historic name is. So yeah, we definitely have buildings and owners that could take advantage of it. I think one of the misnomers is that historic buildings that take advantage of historic tax credit have certain rules, and those rules are there, but they are very flexible. And another component is that often just to increase and fix your mechanical systems can help you meet that substantial base. So yeah, maybe the building's in good shape, but there's still an advantage of taking advantage of that tax credit simply because of the investment that you might need to make in the building for the infrastructure of the building. So I'd love to see more historic projects in the tax credit realm in Cleveland Heights for sure.
And I think I would just add to that it's not only so the buildings have to be income producing, so you can't use the state tax credit on the wide range of historic, single family homes in Cleveland Heights, but you can use them on apartment buildings. And so Cleveland Heights does have a really good stock of kind of smaller scale and mid-rise apartment buildings that the federal credit may be a little complex for, but the state credit, really both can work, but the state credit is a good option there. And as Diana said, there's ways to meet like the substantial base requirements and those things. So I'm not as familiar with which areas of Cleveland Heights those types of multifamily structures are in existing historic districts. So there may be some pre-legwork to do there to make them eligible for the tax credits, but it's another way that I think these financial incentives can benefit a city like Cleveland Heights.
And duplexes count. So, if it's
yes,
and you're renting out that duplex, a duplex would be eligible for historic tax credit. So it is. Or if you run a business out of your home that is, substantially part of the home the business runs out. I'm trying to think of an example. It can't just be I have an office in my house, but an Airbnb is another example that can be in a house and still take advantage of that historic tax credit, that income producing component.
Brian, a question, or I'd like to hear your thoughts on. I've seen national studies that show that residential historic districts, that homes in those local historic districts that have to go through a design review process when they make certain exterior major changes, that those are typically stronger. They retain stronger housing markets and retain their value more, have more neighborhood stability. But in the study you did with the Heritage Home Program, those houses did not need to be listed historic. They just had to be over 50 years old. So do you think that just simply taking the preservation approach, whether or not it's subject to a design review, makes a difference in the value and stability that's created out of those homes?
Yeah, it's still additional investment in the structure, right? So we're still seeing the benefits that come out of that increased investment, even though I would imagine that we see those similar effects. So we're seeing the direct structure effect because we are improving the immediate structure, and the neighborhoods are benefiting from that, or the neighbors are benefiting from that in terms of the neighborhood housing stock. I think that those effects would be even stronger in those districts that have kind of stricter guidelines that would be followed. So I would anticipate that it would be even stronger than the effects that we found in our study.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I do see a question that came through the chat. The question is, how are federal and state tax credits applied to residential projects?
Stephanie, I'll take that one. So they don't. There are not federal or state for residential use. Like I said, it has to be income producing. But as you know, part of the conversation that we're having here is that there are heritage home loans that offer low interest rates for those historic properties. So again, I think it just has to be 50 years old. Is that correct, Margaret? You don't have to be listed on the National Register. You don't have to be a landmark. You just have to be 50 years older. And you can take advantage of those low interest loans to increase the value of your building if you have a project in mind.
I would also add that Diana is totally correct. So the federal and state credits do not apply to owner-occupied residential properties at this time. I would offer that it is an area of ongoing advocacy by the preservation community at the federal level and at the state level. So some states, not Ohio, but some other states do allow their state tax credits to be used for owner-occupied housing. So if that's something that you are interested in, I encourage you to write your representatives at the state and federal level, because it is an ongoing, sort of constantly ongoing area of advocacy by preservationists.
Yeah, I believe Kentucky offers it, so they're a program to look for guidance on.
If anyone has any other questions, is there a good place to contact? Do people have different emails they want to share for their contact information? I was going to say if people have like general questions, they could send them to me at localhistory@heightslibrary.org, but I didn't know if anyone else wanted to share their contact information. Oh, wonderful. Thank
Put
you.
mine in the chat. If anyone wants to email me, feel free to do so at any time.
Same here. I can be contacted. NaylorWellman.com is our website. It has both Wendy and I contact, and we'd be happy to assist anybody that we can.
Email, come down, take a class, whatever's convenient.
Yeah.
I also put the Heritage Home Program website in the chat. If you're a resident and you're curious to learn more about that. Brian mentioned he studied aspects of the loans, but we also offer free technical assistance and advice. So a preservationist or a former contractor can come out to your house, or in this day and age, we can do a virtual site visit. We can answer questions from as simple as, do you think I need a new roof, to someone totally remodeled my porch and what should it look like to be historic, or what would my house maybe have been painted, what colors might it have been when it was originally built, to I want to put a new addition on, what should I do, what are the steps, what's compatible, who can do the work. We can refer you to contractors, we can review bids. So all that type of project advice is free to you, whether or not you're interested in the loan product. So I do encourage residents to check us out.
Yeah, we did also record the lecture, so it should go up within a day or so to the Cleveland Heights Historical YouTube channel in case anyone wants to review anything in the lecture or, share it with their friends. All righty, thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, so thank you all. This was a wealth of information. It was really wonderful. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.